Good afternoon. I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. My name is, yeah, I'm sorry, I messed that one up. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Sutton. I'm the host of Project Sanity. I want to thank you all for joining us for another episode, whether it's on the Benjamin Dixon Show channel or on Project Sanity's own channel. Subscribe to it, like it, share with your friends, send help, whichever you prefer. I'm joined by my irresponsibly talented co-hosts, Adair Schmidt and Richard Green, and special guest, Nicholas Nowlin from the Takedown with Nick, also on the Benjamin Dixon Show channel. So say hello, guys.
Oh gosh, let me try and get some of us on screen. Hey everyone, just getting everything working back here on the production side. Thank you all for joining us. Make sure to like, share, subscribe. We really appreciate it. And go ahead, Adair.
Hey folks, please don't let Brandon give y'all an unrealistic expectation of what we actually are good at. I mean, just bear with us. Just bear with us tonight.
I am not about unrealistic expectations. All I can guarantee you is that everyone who you're going to see tonight is genetically superior to Steve Bannon.
Yep. Once again, I'm glad to join you guys. Go ahead and speak out tonight. I know on Monday we had just a cluster of technical difficulties, both on our side and on our guest side. So we couldn't get that resolved before we basically ran out of time on the show. So we'll be continuing that on February 20th on the Takedown. Anyway, let's get to it.
We have a packed show tonight. So let's get right into it. So where do you guys want to start? With Jeff Sessions?
Yeah, I wanted to briefly just cover a little bit about Jeff Sessions and talk about the Democrats, because we're going to talk about the resistance, and I think Jeff Sessions and what happened there is important about when referring to how we're going to stop or impede Trump's progress on the things that we don't want. So people know that Jeff Sessions got approved, and essentially Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, gave Jeff Sessions a vote, even though they already had enough to get him confirmed without Jeff Sessions' vote, Manchin's vote. And Manchin has recently been doing several things. He also, about a month or two ago, came out and said that something to the effect of, we need to re-up the war on drugs, which we also heard out of Donald Trump today again. And we've also heard from Jeff Sessions that basically he doesn't understand cannabis policy or the effects of cannabis use or marijuana use. And
we're bad people if we use it, is all he knows.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, you know what? Let's provide some context for Jeff Sessions, right? Before we get,
I'm hoping a lot of the people that have watched some of what Ben's talked about and Anoa and others, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, we'll just do best hits. We'll do number one hits off his album. So Jeff Sessions is a senator from the great state of, I want to say, Alabama.
He is from Alabama. I wouldn't necessarily call it a great state, but he is from Alabama.
It's a fine state, wonderful state. In the top 50, definitely, 100%.
Not in reading or writing.
Yeah, in reading or writing, it's top 50 states in reading or writing. I can guarantee you that.
I don't know. It might have been replaced with Mexico. Who knows?
Anyway, in the 80s, Jeff Sessions was denied a judgeship under the Reagan administration because he was viewed as too racist. Several prominent figures in history spoke out about Jeff Sessions at that time when Senator Strom Thurmond was going to appoint him, including Coretta Scott King, which I'm sure some of you have heard about with Elizabeth Warren's thing, and Ted Kennedy, who Ted Kennedy at the time called Jeff Sessions a throwback to one of America's worst periods.
Damn.
Yeah. He's been a sitting senator for about 20 years or so, and he was recently confirmed in a vote of 53 to 47.
I thought it was 52 to 48, but that's just splitting hairs.
Yeah, well, 52, 53 to 48 or 47. I'm sorry, I can't think off the top of my head. And as the Attorney General, and also, one of my favorite quotes for him is that he used to think the KKK was great until he found they smoked marijuana.
You're kidding. Can we? No, Richard, can you screen share and then put that quote up if you can find it, please? Because I want to see that one.
Unfortunately, I have a browser down back here, which has basically completely ruined all of my shots. That's why we're seeing me trying to scramble a bit back here. So I'm trying to do the best I can to make sure we can get folks on screen. I may end up just using some cycling, so if it might look a little strange for a while, and we might not be able to do any tags.
So
remember,
well, you know, let's just go into it. Let's get right into it. So Jeff Sessions was one of, I would say, two appointees that got a lot of attention, right? The other being DeVos, who was also confirmed 51-50 with Pence being the tiebreaker, and Sessions being the second big stance that Democrats were going to take, when previously they were basically pushing all of the appointees through for, expedience sake, or rather they didn't want to appear to be obstructing the system because that would be bad. And what kind of political party obstructs the system? That'd be crazy. We don't have that in America. So, Rich, what about Jeff Sessions did you want to talk about, besides the fact that he's awful?
Well, essentially what I was thinking is Joe Manchin has been, I mean, you can look at his voting record, and he's among several kind of the blue dog Democrats or red state Democrats that I knew as soon as Trump got elected were going to be the bane to any sort of cohesion of resistance among the Democratic Party, like we saw from the 40 senators in the Republican, or 40 Republican senators when Obama first took office, how they rigidly stood against anything and everything, even if it was something that they supported. We weren't going to get anything like that from these Democrats, and Joe Manchin was one of the first ones to come out and basically say that he's in line. And why that particularly matters with Jeff Sessions and Joe Manchin is, and the most recent comment from Trump with the war on drugs and with his incompetence, is we know what the war on drugs was, and what they're going, essentially they're trying to reinvigorate the using the war on drugs to essentially criminalize people with political opinions that they disagree with, and that's going to that bodes poorly for the type of resistance or protests and things that we're going to be talking about later. So I just thought that was an important aspect to keep in mind while we talk about this, especially with states trying to pass laws making various forms of protests punishable by law.
I believe there's 10 of those, including our own home state of Washington, for Richard and I. But question, legitimate questioner, do y'all believe that Jeff Sessions and Donald and that, I can't even remember his name, the senator from West Virginia, all believe truthfully that that the war on drugs is a thing that's actually good? Like, do you guys believe that they're drinking that Kool-Aid, or do you think that it really is the racist undertones and that they are going after political enemies? Personally, I think other than the fact that they're, well, at least Donald and Sessions are both racist pieces of human excrement, I think they've been drinking the Kool-Aid. Like, I think they've been drinking that Kool-Aid. I think they're all hopped up on that after-school program Dare and things like that, and just say no to drug. I think they really believe all of that. Like, it's actually effective.
Sessions seemed genuinely ignorant about about the whole marijuana as a gateway drug type stuff. So, I mean,
Sessions is an old scared white dude.
Yeah, I mean, he might have
tell
seen
him anything
some
is bad,
of
and he's going to believe it
from that time of Harry Anslinger and William Hearst and all that. Good.
So that's the thing, right? There is a coalition of people within our government who are trying to keep drugs illegal, or rather not illegal, but criminalized. They're trying to keep drugs, specifically marijuana, criminalized. And whether it's because they are explicitly racist and they understand the racist undertones of the Nixon's war on drugs, Reagan's war on crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's irrelevant, because along with those people are also the ones who, have drunk the Kool-Aid, who are like, oh, drugs are bad. I did Dare in school. They told me if I puffed the Magic Dragon one time, I would be robbing banks and giving blowjobs for $15 behind the local Safeway within 2 weeks. And then there's this third group who are just pharmaceutical company shills, right? And we saw this with Andrew Cuomo, where someone who takes a large sum of money from big pharma or the alcohol industry, who have a vested interest in keeping marijuana illegal because it is a safer alternative to both drugs and alcohol. Yeah. And I mean, right, and by drugs I mean pharmaceuticals and opioids.
You have that,
opioids specifically.
You have that with a lot of there's been quite a few veterans groups coming out and saying, "Hey, I'm a veteran and I use marijuana to treat the residual effects of being in the military." Goodness. chronic pain and things like that. Even PTSD, chronic pain, all sorts of different ailments they use marijuana to treat. And they're like, at one point, I was on 30 different medications and friendless and thinking of killing myself. I mean, these are real interviews done with real veterans who are coming out and saying, hey, marijuana has helped me get away from that. There's videos coming out with groups that have talked to opioid users who say marijuana has been their anti-gateway drug. I mean, I don't think that's going to apply to everybody, but I think, frankly, there's like you said, there's a lot of BS, and there's just been a lot of Kool-Aid drinking. I mean, I went to the Dare assemblies as a kid in the 90s and the early 2000s and stuff, and remember being told, your neighborhood drug dealers, because an area that we lived was rife with crime and poverty and drug dealing and all these other things. So, I mean, we saw the bad effects of drugs, right? We saw those things. We went to the Dare and everyone was like, oh, no, I'll never do drugs. And then as people got older and started, more research on marijuana came out, more, places like England and stuff classifying CBD as medication and not a drug. It's really starting to change a lot of the public perception. But you have this older generation, this old guard that, for whatever reason, associates marijuana with black people gone nuts and brown people going out and rioting.
That's definitely. That's definitely true. There definitely is. Well, there's two things you mentioned that are important, right? It's this dual-edged sword, or rather, this double-sided sword. Double-edged. Double-edged sword of black people being criminalized and criminals being racialized as black. And so we have this perception in our country that crime is a thing that black people do. And when people picture criminals, they picture black people. And drugs, by being so criminalized, have become this issue that we inextricably attach to Black America. And it's both responsible for all of their problems, but also it's something that they're trying to, push into, effuse into other parts of American society. And that's why we see unequal enforcement of drug laws as it comes to the black community. That's why we see, white and black people smoking marijuana at equal rates.
I actually think I believe that it was white kids actually end up smoking more marijuana at a higher rate than black kids do. Then, again, folks who are first time watching this show, as far as I'm concerned, people that are called Latino or Native American, Mexico, Puerto Rico, all that. So Native Americans smoke marijuana at lower rates than your typical suburban white kids do, even still. But these are the people, Native Americans, black folks, Asian kids, these are the ones that are going to jail for it, even though they're less likely to use it and less likely to sell it.
Well, it's a post hoc explanation, right? So, they're not going to jail because they do drugs. They're going to jail because they're black, and them doing drugs is kind of just an explanation for why. They criminalize behavior that is basically ubiquitous at this point. And upon criminalizing behavior that was ubiquitous, they selectively enforced it as well. And so there is it comes down to when we talk about racist laws, and we talk about laws that are not only racist in the pure wording of the law, like Jim Crow laws or, laws of the integration era, but laws that have both racist origins, like the drug war, and other sort of post-civil rights era laws like loitering and vagrancy that was specifically implemented and written with black people in mind. But go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wouldn't be surprised if in 20 years you find that, African Americans are a lot less likely to do drugs because, when stuff like this hits, a generation or two, I was brought up, kind of like where your parents teach you don't touch any drugs because that's just a trap. White people can do drugs and they may not be punished for it. But, as a black person, you for sure will get caught and get punished and it'll mark you for the rest of your life. There's a lot more consequences for you because of that, because you're black. So, drugs really kind of serve as a trap. And I'm wondering, how long before that has an effect. And you'll find that, black kids are actually less likely to use the drugs because of that.
I mean, to at least to my knowledge, and I'm going to speak specifically to the opioid crisis that we're experiencing right now, right? The people that are most affected by this are rural white Americans. A lot of these epidemics that we're seeing are hitting white America disproportionately. And I think a lot of that has to do with what you just said, Nick, because a lot of us were told growing up, you don't even associate with it because it's, they're going to look for an excuse to send you to jail. They will try to find any excuse they can. And it's going to make it so that way, whatever you want to do later on in life you're not going to be able to. You're limited. Your options are cut off. And so I think we are starting to see that.
Not only that, drugs are expensive, and poor people.
Drugs are expensive.
It's a habit, and you just can't afford it.
And that's a great point too. And I went to I went to a public school in New York City up until 7th grade, and I transitioned to a private school, like a well-off private school, and a hippie part of town. A lot of wealth in there. I went to school with some actors' kids, some morning talk show host kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we were all we didn't have Dare there. We had Dare when I was in public school, but there we were taught by teachers. Yeah, experimenting with drugs is fine. No, and I usually we were not go ahead, obviously, but if you're gonna experiment with drugs, do it safely, do it with people you trust, et cetera. But there was never we never had the sort of don't do drugs talk.
Right.
And it was funny because the kids I went to school with had lots of money. So they had lots of money for drugs. And by the time I was, in high school, people were doing coke in the bathrooms.
Right.
And it's funny because it is this dual education. That we're teaching, that black kids are being taught by their parents and by their schools, don't do drugs because either it's a trap or it'll blow up your future, or you'll become an addict. And well-off white kids are told, well, hey, experimenting is fine. When you're young, you should experiment, find out what you like, and et cetera, because there is relatively a consequence-free environment that they are aware of. But I think you make an interesting point. I do want to transition to our other topic, talking about violent protest. And I just want to say thank you again to the Benjamin Dixon Show channel for hosting us and allowing us to get our message out to you. Subscribe, like, share. And that's in a lot of ways, whether we're talking about working class, we're talking about the struggle, whether the struggle with drugs or the struggle with economic class or basically whatever struggle we're talking about. There does seem to be this contingent of white people in America who become silent victims of the way we discuss these things. Whether it be the drug war, and you're right, there is an opioid epidemic in America, and it is disproportionately affecting rural white people. Disproportionately, and we don't talk about it. I mean, there might be a small article every so often in the Daily Beast, but we don't talk about it proportionally to the way the problem is. Macklemore makes a lot of songs about it.
We don't even talk about it in the way that they talked about the crack epidemic. I don't know how many of our viewers remember the crack epidemic. I was brought up towards the end of it, right? When I was growing up, the crack epidemic was going away. But even then, it was shoved down our throats. The crack epidemic in the black community, the scourge of the black community. Crack is the black person killer. That's something you see with opioids. And I mean, it sounds comical, but that's literally how I remember growing up, being told these things. It's like, man, crack is a killer. You don't want to be on that stuff. And I'm like,
crack is whack. Crack is whack.
Remember, but you don't hear that with rural white America because there is this insistence that there cannot be a problem, right? That white people cannot have the same, that just by virtue of being in this country. And it's a systemic thing. It's not a cultural, it's not a rural white person thing per se. But it's a systemic thing where in our country, we have this idea that white people can't have a problem. White people can't have any kind of moral shortcoming for whatever reason, or any kind of shortcoming by virtue of, well, they're white. It's the white community. Whereas every other community is inherently bad, inherently immoral, inherently victims, and more likely to fall into these traps of drug use, drug abuse, and the consequences thereof.
I mean, I think that's one half of it, but I think there's also this kind of devaluing of the role that class plays in determining people's success, when overemphasis on the role that race plays. And so whether you're talking about the left or the right, the left has characterized with the working class white voter, the rural white voter in a very, very homogenized way. It's it's racist white males. They don't talk about the working class as a multi-ethnic thing. They don't talk about the rural class as a multi-ethnic thing. And when the left, the people who are or who are usually easier on crime, right? The left should be the one, the people, the liberals or Democrats, whatever we're going to characterize them as. They're the ones who are normally the ones broaching this topic of, well, we have a drug problem, and the drug problem is not that people are doing drugs and committing crime. The drug problem is that people are addicted and they need help, and our society should be providing them with the help they need. By nature of the way that the Democrats have scapegoated working class white people as the real racists, as like you said, people who cannot be victimized, people who by nature of their race cannot be victimized in any way. And also, like I said, they homogenize the working class, they homogenize the rural white as a male. They can't be victimized by nature of their gender as well.
Right.
It creates this silence on the left because the working class white, the rural white, is their natural sort of scapegoat for their own racism. And the right doesn't want to address those things because they're tough on crime, they're tough on drugs. And also, let's be honest, they're also in the pocket of, both are in the pocket of pharma, of big pharma. True. And the opioid addiction makes bank for big pharma. Because these drugs. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, you make a good point there. Like, we shouldn't even be, dealing in the illusion that, like, really what's going on is some people think drugs are bad and they're destroying society, and some people don't. I think that's just the cover. What it really comes down to is some people are making money off of things being the way they are, and some people stand to make a lot of money off of change. You really have to start looking at our government interactions in that form.
Absolutely.
I think it's absolutely true. Go ahead. I'm not really. I think that. I think Adair made an interesting point at the beginning, right?
By the way, I didn't mean to derail this, which I feel like I have. I didn't mean to derail.
2 more minutes on it, and then make sure we go to protests.
Absolutely. But I think Adair makes a good point. Why are people in our government so anti-drug when the rest of America seems to have, based on polling and data and statistics, are more pro-marijuana, if not drugs. They're pro-legalization. They're at least pro-decriminalization of marijuana. How do we have this discrepancy between the populace and the politicians? And let's be honest, there is a discrepancy between the popular and politicians, both in demographics and in actual physical demographics like age, race, sex, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but also in ideological leanings. Like our Congress, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly mention while we're talking about this that with all the ire going towards South American and immigration and the drug traffickers and the cartels that Trump is allegedly going to be cracking down with this new drug war, we consume about 90% of the cocaine that's produced out of Colombia, for example, which is quite a bit of cocaine, and almost all of it comes to us, just like Europe consumes most of the opium derivatives that come out of the Middle East up until our war, and we started confiscating poppy fields and so on and so forth. But cocaine consumption is well cracked in the inner city. There's a lot of people in Beverly Hills and in other zip codes like that don't get talked about when we talk about the drug epidemic or the crime epidemic because they're functional addicts and also the financial motive that's going on in there. And when you talk about cracking down on cartels, you never crack down on all of them. What you do is you increase the market share of the one that usually has the most favorable deal with the U.S. government to one degree or another. That's what ends up happening.
Let's transition. But first, I'll just say this, and it's not only just the big pharma. This whole thing, the drug war itself, has always been about controlling the population. Mm-hmm. It's always been a way to, it's been used to justify the militarization of police force. It's been a way to justify neocolonization in South America. It's this way to create these these external and internal threats for America. That the drugs are such a problem that we have to have this multi-agency war going on, both inside and outside America, to control the drug trade in some way. And it's another never-ending war. The drug war is a never-ending war, just like the war on terror is. And while a lot of people have kind of woken up to the war on terror being this fallacy, you can't, it's an amorphous threat. You can't stop it this way. A lot of people are still drinking the Kool-Aid with the war on drugs, and so we have a situation where both John Kelly and Mike Pompeo are drug warriors. John Kelly specifically is a drug warrior. And, he wants to spend more money on the drug war in South America. And you have people in Congress, liberals in Congress, the Democrats, asking him to denounce the Filipino president for killing drug dealers and, or rather killing people in the name of killing people because he's accused them of drugs. But our drug war is fine. Our drug war is moral and righteous. And so, like, the drug war is just another one of these existential crises that were going on there, another one of these moral panics that we have in our country that justify military expansion internally and externally. But speaking of military expansion internally, let's transition to talk about violent protests, because last week there was a violent protest at Berkeley. People were protesting. Black Bloc was there to protest the speaking of Milo Yiannopoulos. Is it Milo or Milo?
I've heard it is Milo. But
okay.
That could just be him wanting to say his name some type. I don't really care. I just call him a fascist.
I don't know. I don't consume Breitbart, and I don't consume alt-right stuff, and I definitely don't consume the work of, how do I put this judicially? There will always be a market for people who are Black, people, women, LGBTQ community who are preaching the status quo or preaching alt-right nonsense. Like there will always be work for Stacey Dash.
I mean, there's that sheriff in Minnesota who's Black, who's just, like so hardcore. Like he's internalized so much racism that, I mean, I feel like it's fair to call him a white supremacist almost at this point. Like he fights actively for white supremacy in America and is actively against any sort of protest from Black folks. Like, I don't know. So it's something we see often. I just call him that.
He's over the top, and he's managed to. He talked about basically starting riots if Trump didn't win or whatever, and so you can also see the hypocrisy and all that.
But I mean, that's just the framing of the conversation, because I think it's time that we actually sit down and have a conversation about violent protests. Because like there have been more than a few, right? There have been more than a few protests that have led to the destruction of property, a few people being hospitalized, and the response from both the right and liberals have been to categorically denounce violent resistance, like entirely. Like a violent resistance is to be denounced, and I think we should actually have to have a conversation about that. So
I think it's fine. I mean, like I'm and here's my caveat to that, folks. By the way, when I say I think violent protesting is fine, I think it's fine so long as you are not attacking people. I don't care about property destruction. I don't care about $10,000 or $100,000 of damage being done at a public university. I don't mind that. Property is not something that, at least in my eyes, you broke a window, your protest is there for. No, I don't care. Break the damn window. I do have an issue though with someone pepper spraying a woman in the face because she was wearing a Donald Trump's campaign slogan hat on CNN. I have an issue with that. Like there's violent protests, and then there's just going out and willfully attacking people just to willfully attack people. And I think I draw a line there, but I don't have an issue when protests break Starbucks windows. I don't have an issue if you're going to light a dumpster fire. I don't care about that. I really don't.
Well, I mean,
I
think we do have
efficacy.
I will say we have to distinguish between protesters who go out there to commit violence and also violence that occurs as the result of tension being up,
right?
And also violence that is instigated by police who are infiltrating the protesters, because that does actually happen.
Riot police, here's my experience in a protest that nearly turned really violent, and this was back in Philly at the convention when we were in that media tent. When it was just plainclothes cop, when it was just the regular, not plainclothes, but the regular uniformed state patrol cops there, they blocked the doors, which made a lot of us feel uncomfortable. But a lot of these folks were like, hey, you know what? I realize the doors are blocked. We're not here to arrest anybody, but there's a huge crowd on that side. There's 600 of you in here. If we let too many more people in here, it's going to get really, really dangerous. So we've blocked the doors until that crowd disperses, and then we're going to let everybody out. And then it was cool. When riot police showed up, just by the nature of them being in riot gear, just by that, I don't know how many of you folks have played sports, and I can't remember if anyone on the panel with me has played sports, but there's this kind of almost alter ego that you can get when you put your uniform on, when you know you're about to go out and you're going to start hitting and things are going to start getting violent. You expect violence when you put this uniform on. You expect to go out and you get amped up and you do these things. And you see that with riot cops. So when you send riot cops out where there's no riot just because people are gathering, you're going to send out cops in riot gear with batons and these shields and all this. That in and of itself is an act of violence. That in and of itself is a show of force. Is this flexing of the muscles to say, hey, we can shut this down if we want.
I would agree with that. I think that sending out riot police, at the very least, is an escalation. The sending out riot police before there is a riot is an escalation. It's not de-escalating situation.
Zero issues.
And at the very worst, sending riot police out before there's a riot, especially considering that we do know, and it sounds like a conspiracy, but we do know that there are police instigators who go into crowds and try to start violence at these protests. Right. At the very worst, it is simply they have pre-knowledge of the fact that a riot's going to happen, or they plan on creating one. And I would say optically, even if it's not in actuality, optically having riot police at a protest makes it look like a riot.
Yeah,
because like riot police, like you said, like they're wearing the uniform, like they're performing the riot, they're costumed for the riot, and so it makes it a riot, and it definitely doesn't make it any less safe. I mean, it doesn't make it any less dangerous.
I think it makes it
except for anyone but the police. It makes it more dangerous because frankly, you're going out there to protest and you're being met with riot police
with a literal show of force. Like when we were there before the riot police came into the media tent in Philadelphia, there was no violence. After the media, after they came in, people were shoving and pushing, and the riot cops immediately took that first cue and started shoving an entire group of people into a line of cops. I mean, think about that.
So, I mean, I do want to address something that Rich said, right? So Rich brought up the fact that, property destruction, and that's what we heard a lot, right? So, and that's why I try to make the distinguish between people who go to protest and the protest becomes violent or becomes uncivil, and people who go to protest with the intention of committing violence or property destruction, such as Black Bloc. And a lot of people, and see, so Black Bloc is something that's hard to pin down, obviously, because like it's such a not anarchy, it's acephalous. They don't have a chart, they don't have all these things that you can't hold any one member of Black Bloc accountable for another member of Black Bloc. But they do have an ideology, right? Black Bloc's intention is to go to these protests to prevent police abuse of peaceful protesters by shielding peaceful protesters with their bodies, by stopping police from instigating violence at these protests. That's what they do. In terms of property destruction, Black Bloc has a very specific ideology about property destruction. They view property destruction as a form of self-defense, insofar as they say, if the police come and start behaving violently, we are going to start breaking things, and we are going to start breaking things so to demonstrate that to cost the city money, to cost et cetera, people money, and that is just another form of self-defense in their minds. Whether you disagree with that, they do have a rational reason for why they do it. That a lot of people don't understand. It's not meaningless violence. It is. They do have an ideology behind it.
Dr. King purposely had people. He told people like, let's get arrested because if they want to arrest us, let's sit in jail. Then let's put a financial strain on the system if they're going to try to break up this protest through this violent effort. So, I mean, it's not something, it's a different tactic, but to cost the system money for trying to break up a legitimate protest is something that we've seen time and time again. And the optics might not always be great, but hey, if it works, it works.
Well,
see, the thing, I'm not,
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, here's the thing. So I'm not wholesale against violence, right? I don't take a wholesale all war is wrong, all violence is wrong. I think that's a very purist position to use the bad word. What I will say is this: two things. It's not for people who, or rather, first is this: when you talk about violent protesting, when you pinpoint violence that occurs at protests by people who are protesting the status quo, protesting fascism, protesting, et cetera, what you are doing, you are minimizing the thing that they're protesting, right? And you're saying that the violence that they commit against that system or against agents of that system, whether they be police or property, is somehow worse than the systemic violence. And I mean, you're not saying that directly. And I think that you can obviously you can criticize two things at once. You can criticize structural violence and the violence that goes on at protest. But in my mind, or rather from my position or in my opinion, one type of violence has been normalized. That's why it's structural. It's why it's systemic. It's been normalized. It's just the way things are. And that's the kind of violence that people are out there protesting. It's the violence of the police. It's the violence of the state against Native Americans. It's the violence of the state versus, it's the oil. I'm sorry. It's the fascist violence of oil companies against those protesting them. That kind of violence has been normalized, and people, usually oppressed people or people who are protesting on behalf of oppressed people, committing violence towards the state has been deemed unacceptable. Surprise, surprise, by agents of the state or people who benefit from the status quo. And here's why I would say, this is my second point. It's not for agents of the state or people who benefit from the oppression that people are protesting to go out and call for nonviolent protest. It's not like that is incredibly disingenuous and incredibly, what's the word? Shitty. It's shitty. It's shitty for some. It's shitty for. It's shitty because basically what you're saying is that I've committed violence towards you, or I've benefited from violence that has been committed towards you, but you should be the bigger man and not commit violence. And while I lean towards a more nonviolent resistance type of mentality, not always, but maybe mostly. But the idea that that the president would come out and call for nonviolent resistance, or the police would come out and call for nonviolent resistance, like that is really, considering the systemic inequality, systemic violence that exists, that is not their
it's not morally acceptable.
It emphasizes the mentality that a conflict doesn't exist until you attack the state. The state can do as much violence against you as it would like, but once you punch back, once you hit the state back, once you punch white people back, once you punch an alt-right Nazi back, that they can call for your genocide, they can call for your eradication, but once you hit back, whether physically or even sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes just with words, it's harassment, it's bullying, it's assault, and it's like, no, it's not.
Okay, so here's what I want to say. I say, as far as trying to meet, counter revolution with violent, with violence, or even trying to get out a political aim through violence, it's very, very difficult for me to say that left wing movements, even like Black Lives Matter, should really be out there, really using violence outside of self defense. Like if someone's attacking you, I'm not saying be nonviolent, just take the ass whooping, right? At the same time, I wouldn't suggest really trying to engage the oppressors in some sort of power struggle where you set the arena is going to be like some sort of physical or violent arena, because the preponderance of force is on their side. So that's definitely not where you want to be. But now going back to your point where we're talking about protests in general. We have to remember when social unrest is happening, that indicates a failure of institutions, of civilized institutions, to respond to the needs and the desires of a large number of people. Remember, there's only so many people that actually get out there in the streets. Out of everybody who's aggrieved, a very small fraction will actually get out and protest about it. So that means a lot more people are actually suffering from these conditions and would like to see them ameliorated than what we see, out here in these protests. And so that just, it really illustrates a failure of the American institutions to really respond to the general public in any sort of rational way that will prevent these type of outbreaks. So when destruction of property and things of that nature happen, we just have to understand that is what social unrest looks like. And really, instead of even talking about whether the protest was violent or not, we should be trying to understand why people are out there protesting and what has them so aggrieved that this social unrest is almost is just permeating across the country.
That was my original point, right? That by targeting the violence that occurs at the protest, by pinpointing that violence and looking at it in a vacuum, in a way, either intentionally or not unintentionally, what it does is it distracts from the actual violence that it distracts from whatever reason they went out there to protest in the first place. Yes. And also that it is intentional sometimes, right? It's this notion of respectability politics as it exists in civil disobedience, and a lot of this has to do with imagined civil rights movement, a civil rights movement that really did not exist. A Martin Luther King Jr. who never raised his voice, who never blocked traffic, who really, really was just all about, nothing, right? A whitewash, defanged Martin Luther King Jr.
And a white populace that along with it, that apparently had much more favorable opinions of Martin Luther King Jr. and we didn't see the types of things being said about him that we're seeing being said about Black Lives Movement or similar movements.
Yeah, and it's a poo-pooing of these. I'm sorry, let me just finish. It's a poo-pooing. It's a poo-pooing of these protesters by people, in the mainstream media, as now. And I agree. It is, from expediency point, perhaps nonviolent protests would be received better if it was received at all, because we know the media does not always show these protests unless there is some violence. So I think the notion that, if you would just, but they do use hey, if you had just behaved properly, maybe we would have heard you out. But unfortunately, you were violent. So now we don't care about racism.
It's the moving goalpost.
Well, hold on one second. Let me just respond. I was going to say, yeah, I agree with your point. I was just trying to highlight the fact that social unrest is the responsibility of institutions. Social unrest is the responsibility of the civilized society to ensure that things like that don't happen. We're supposed to have these institutions, these mechanisms to make sure people can actually have their stuff addressed before it leads to a situation like this. And I think that that's something that needs to be emphasized.
So here's something I want to point out, because I agree with both of you. And this is, I point this out because I want to underline just kind of what we're talking about. So this same Milo cat came up to Seattle. He was on the University of Washington campus. And there was an anti-fascist protest. One of the anti-fascist protesters was literally shot by one of Milo's supporters. They shot him, and he was, I think he's pulled out of it now, was in critical condition and nearly died. The fascist supporter who shot that person got away, and then later the next day turned themselves in. The police then released them without incident, and nobody's heard anything about it since. Somebody was literally shot, shot, and the only media coverage that came out of that really that wasn't local that I know of was that protests at UW were violent against fascist troll Milo Yiannopoulos, or whatever you pronounce his last name. That in and of itself, as far as I'm concerned, is an act of violence. That's an act of violence by the media, and then a further act of violence was by the police, who let the person who shot this human being go. They let this person go. The person that was the anti-fascist protester, there was no evidence that they were attacking the person that shot them. They were just out there protesting a fascist troll at one of Seattle's safest. Seattle's a safe city. One of the safest parts of a very safe city, and he got shot. They got shot for it. I mean, media has their own acts of violence, and then the police and the state just kind of compound it.
Well, I mean, it's a lose-lose scenario, right? So people pretend like nonviolent protests are always treated either with respect by the media or by the population, that their grievance, like if you're nonviolent, your grievances are respected and listened to inherently by the media, that you can just reason the state to give up its power or to stop oppressing you. But like I said, it's a moving goalpost. It's like what is considered nonviolent or proper civil disobedience is basically whatever is no civil disobedience. No civil disobedience is ever considered to be proper unless it is a rally in favor of the status quo, the Women's March.
Right.
Like if you are an activist in favor of the status quo, then absolutely you'll be viewed with you will be viewed in the warmest of lights by agents of the state's media. But if you are actually doing if you're actually getting out there, okay, I'll put it this way. What makes a protest respectable is never the tactics. It's always the grievance. And to pretend otherwise is to be disingenuous. The legitimacy, or rather the respectability of any political engagement or any political activity, whether it be a speech or a rally or a protest or anything, is always, or a debate performance, it tends to be basically how how are you implicating the system? Like how deep into the status quo are you going? Like if you are only disrupting the dominant narrative of society a little bit, then of course, warmest of lights, women's march, women, upper middle class white women, they should totally be paid as much as men. The MSNBC can get totally behind that. Protesting the media conglomeration, nope.
You're right.
They block traffic. That's disregarded.
By the way, real quick, Anoa wrote a really great piece, and I think it pertains to do with things like the Women's March and things like that, and about allyship. And just for you folks who are watching right now, I suggest you go to progressivearmy.com and you read Anoa's article. It's really well written. So I just wanted to throw that out there because when you were talking about this, it just kind of jogged that memory.
Let me say something about the person that was shot. The person that may have perpetrated an assault with a deadly weapon against an individual that was released by the police. There's a long history of right-wing violence and crimes committed by right-wing extremists that go unpunished by the state. And when I was trying to speak about this to someone, they just didn't get that, right-wing extremism is real. They are violent. And oftentimes when they commit crimes, if they're extremists from the right-wing nature, most of the time the state kind of ignores them. They don't really get punished. You see like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, there's, provocateurs inside the crowd to do something wrong so the police can shut them down. They have constant surveillance. They're being harassed. People are being turned into informants. They're being disappeared and then brought back days later while they were under intense questioning. These type of tactics are used all the time against left-wing movements, and you just don't see that, on the right. They may or may not keep tabs on them, but, an administration can change. And next thing you know, they're not even keeping tabs on them anymore.
Well, I mean, right-wing protests...
One sec, Brandon, one sec. That's literally what just happened with this last administration. Like, one of Trump's directives was to, at least to my knowledge from what I've read, was we're not going to track right-wing hate groups anymore. We're not going to track right-wing extremist groups. We don't think that's an issue. We're going to focus on Islamic terror. So, what you just said, literally just happened with this turnover.
Yeah, it's just a continuous history.
I mean, right-wing hate groups, right-wing extremists never tend to challenge the status quo. They're usually challenging any change from the status quo to a more liberal one. They're usually attacking, Planned Parenthood, expanded women's rights, expanded regulations, expanded black rights there, or rather anything like that. Leftist riots, as some would call it, which whatever, are always targeted at the status quo or agents of the state that are oppressive towards, basically oppressed population. To endangered other at-risk populations. So the reason why right-wing terrorism is treated with these kid gloves is because, ultimately, it's not state-sponsored violence, obviously, and sometimes it is, honestly, because you said there are provocateurs out there that are trying to trying to incite violence. But what it is, it's state sanctioned in some ways. It's sanctioned by apathy.
It serves a useful purpose.
Yeah.
To the state.
It's either sanctioned by the state's apathy, and if it's not sanctioned, it's in favor. You can't be a concerted movement, or I'm not put this in a judicious way, right?
Yeah, so, they serve they're useful.
Yeah, they're useful, but the thing that right-wing people are committing violence for is the status quo, and so it becomes hard to criticize right-wing terror without criticizing the status quo that they are trying to go back to, or rather that they are trying to enforce. And so, in order for the state to literally criticize right-wing terror, they would have to criticize the structural and social makeup of the country that has led to this violence. And since they're unwilling to do that, all you can do is make it a one-person issue. While if you want to criticize leftist riots, you can criticize the entire movement for social justice, for economic justice, for these are like anti-state, or rather at least anti-state in the way it's manifested right now, movements. So that's easy to do. But the right-wing terror is usually pro-state movements. And so criticizing pro-state movements is to criticize the state. And whether you're talking about MSNBC or any establishment media organization, they're going to have trouble criticizing the state in any real way. And so the best we get when MSNBC criticizes right-wing terror is it's white supremacy, or it's a white male thing, it's a Christian thing. These very, very shallow critiques of right-wing terror. And we never hash out the class aspects of right-wing terror. The social, the structural and material realities that lead right-wing terrorists to commit right-wing terror.
He's white. Sorry, I got to interrupt you, Brandon, but we are coming up on the ending of our time.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I think David could squeeze us out an extra minute or two to go ahead and close out. So I'm just going to quickly say thanks everybody for watching, sharing, subscribing, and make sure to check us out on projectsanity.org and subscribe over there as well, please. And go ahead.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandon Sutton, and everyone give your goodbyes. Good nights, rather.
I was just going to say February 20th, I'll be having Professor William Darity from Duke University come on, and we're going to have a discussion. Be sure to tune in. Sorry it got delayed because of the technical difficulties.
Good night, folks. I appreciate you guys watching with us tonight. Get engaged with us on Twitter, where I promise we don't bite. Well, Brandon probably does, but he sucks anyway. Good night, folks.
I bite and I suck.
And with that, good night, everyone.